So we are right about at noon, so we'll get started because we got some stuff we can talk about. Hi, everyone. If you don't know, and I think y'all do, but in case you're watching this video later, I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and you've just come to our professional development series on a teaching chat day. About once a month, we have a chat where people can kind of bring questions. I always have questions and things that I want to talk about, but we can kind of talk through issues or ideas that y'all have, and we can actually just do some networking and meeting each other and all of those kind of things. So as you all know, but people watching at home may not, we have professional development series every noon on Wednesday over Zoom. We have these archived for later watching if this doesn't fit your schedule, and you can always reach out with questions after the fact if you have them. But we're happy to see you. And next week, we have a wonderful conversation, I think, about first generation students. Noah is going to nod or not nod to confirm that.
That's in 2 weeks. So next
week. That's in 2 weeks. Okay, Andy Faber is next week then.
Yep.
All right. And there are 2 events coming up, and Andy Faber will have a wonderful event about teaching next week. She is one of our recent Teaching and Learning Center fellows, so I'm really excited to have her. In 2 weeks, we'll have a first gen event with Kylie Moody and Rebecca Paz and Greg Eislein. So we have lots of cool stuff coming up. But here we are and we're ready to chat. So Destiny has already kind of intimated that she has an issue she would like to crowdsource. So before I get to the questions that I have, Destiny, I would love to hear about your situation. I would love to hear what our colleagues have to say.
Okay, awesome. So for those who don't know me, I'm Destiny. I am a graduate student here at K-State. I teach over in the psychological sciences department. And I just recently started an 8-week night course. And how my night course is structured is it's high flex. So I have students who attend both in person and online. And I've been noticing lately that my in-person students are great. They're really engaged. They're answering all the questions. But my Zoom people have gotten to the point where they are now relying on my in-person people to answer my questions. And I've been trying to kind of figure out ways to maybe engage them in that conversation as well. Because right now, every now and then, unless it's like a full class activity, they just pretty much don't participate. They're relying on those in-person students to really answer those questions, unless I'm specifically like, hey, let's hear from somebody on Zoom. And so I would really like some thoughts and ideas on like how to get those people engaged. And I know like, obviously they might have stuff going on as they're doing the class, which is why they've picked online. But I'm struggling a little bit with engaging them and not relying on my in-person students.
So if anyone has any thoughts about this, y'all can contribute. And if you put it in the chat, I will make sure that we read it out loud to the group. So what are people's thoughts?
So Destiny, just for like a clarification, are you do you just generally ask or do you say, hey, people on Zoom, participate in this one?
So in general, I ask, but here lately, because of that lack of engagement from them specifically, I've been saying, all right, for those on Zoom, my in-person people have already answered, X number of questions. Let me hear from you guys. And I just sit there in the awkward silence until somebody talks to me in the chat. So originally it was just general, and now it's getting a little more specifics so that they know, like, I'm not just asking the in-person crowd, I'm asking you guys too.
I know. I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just going to ask Destiny, how many students do you have on Zoom and in person?
So in person, I have anywhere from about 6 to 10 people, depending on like Tuesday, Thursday. On Tuesdays, I have more in person, and on Thursdays, I have more online just because of how their schedules line up. So I average about 5 to 9-ish on Zoom. Sometimes it can be 10, again, depending. So Tuesdays more in person, Thursdays more online.
Sure. Well, one thing that Dawn and I did in advanced social in the spring is that we had any student who attended in person also bring an electronic device, and they logged on to Zoom. And so when they were communicating the chat, like, it was there for everyone to see. And I really thought that did help increase the engagement of those who were only attending online, and using things such as like the waterfall technique that Dawn often talks about, where like, you give them 10 seconds and everyone drops something in the chat when he says go. I think that's like a really good way to kind of increase that engagement and also kind of increase communication between those in person and at home. Again, I don't know how that would work for you. Encourage them to bring it in person, but that's an idea that I had when you started talking.
Yeah, so normally I do that, but I've had a couple of students who don't want to have their laptop at all in person because they see it as a distraction. And I totally understand and get that because I mean, I get distracted on my laptop too when I'm in class. Notification pops up, my email dings, So right now with my in-person class, I have a lot of students who just don't want to be on their laptop. And so I'm trying to respect that, but it's a very hard balance, I think. And then I see in the chat, Melissa, this is happening in your class too. Do you have an attendance policy? I don't have an attendance policy just because I don't really like attendance policies. I have daily reviews that they complete, but they can complete that after class or to their convenience whenever they can get to it. So I don't have a specific attendance policy. And surprisingly, people still really like attending class, which says something good, right? So
I am going to chime in just one clarification because, and I'm asking this because people are talking to us at the TLC about attendance. Not requiring attendance is an attendance policy. So you have one, it's just not a policy that they have to come. So I think it's important that we start to understand that everybody has an attendance policy, and your attendance policy should be made clear to your students. It's just not that we always require attendance. So I think you do have one, and your students know that policy, and they're making the choice to come, which is great. So one of the things that I am wondering though is why, and I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here, why do you want the people at Zoom to participate? And Destiny may have frozen up.
It was a hard-hitting question.
So I'll articulate to this group, and maybe Destiny can chime back in a little bit. But one of the things that I am wondering is that there's a reason those students are on Zoom. And this is something that is happening in my general psychology class. We have the high flex option, and we have 100 in class, and we have some portion under 100 at home watching in on Zoom. And then we have another portion that's watching the videos later. They've made a decision to attend over Zoom for whatever reason. That reason may be that they're managing life. That reason maybe they're not feeling well. That reason maybe they just have other things that are kind of, taking their time. And one of the things that I try to do sometimes, not all the time, is I try to kind of understand based on what my course is. If I don't have a participation policy, if I don't have participation points, well then if the students who have come to class really have stuff to say, is it the best use of my class time to force a comment from people who don't have something to say? Is that the best use of my time? Is that the best use of my learning and my teaching? So one of the things that I would recommend is to articulate to the students in that class what your expectations are. If Destiny is expecting students in her class at home to be contributing, then they need to know that expectation. And they need to know how that expectation is going to be carried out. They need to know what the consequences of not fulfilling that expectation are. But if we're allowing our students to decide to contribute as they see fit in a high flex class, maybe expecting the people at Zoom to contribute is not something we can really coerce. And maybe this is a problem we can't easily solve. And one of the things that I would also say to Destiny is she's like, how can I make this happen? You might not be able to. This might be something that you just can't fix. And Destiny, you came in to hear me say we just might not be able to fix this problem. I said other stuff too. But to kind of give you the brief version, maybe there's something preventing them from contributing, and them being there in Zoom might be what they can offer in that day. And one of the things I didn't say, but I'll say it now, is if that student or those students are having any hesitancy about contributing in the class, maybe that's going to create anxiety for them. Maybe they won't log in anymore. So maybe them kind of passively contributing to those conversations or just listening is better than not having them there. One of the things that was actually brought to our attention for the teaching chat, and you may have seen of this in some of our advertising for this, is some people don't want to chat. They want to listen to the rest of us chat. So one of the things that we've done in our kind of pitching for this event is letting you know, if you just want to sit back and listen, that's completely, totally fine. Because some people, as soon as we start going around the room and contributing thoughts, they sign out. They don't want to contribute that thought. So just some things to kind of consider. And then some things in the chat. So Andy's wondering about the in-person people writing their thoughts on a slip of paper. I wonder if this is in reaction to the waterfall technique we were mentioning before. Trin is asking the online student behavior as far as turning on their camera. So are they engaged, or are they tuning in with their camera? Or are those cameras videos off?
So I encourage them to turn on their video, but as you guys saw, my internet is spotty in itself, so I don't ask them to if they don't feel comfortable, or if their internet can't handle it. Usually what I've been doing lately that I've been thinking about implementing a little bit more is like Zoom specific polls to give them that passive way, but still show that they're listening, that they're engaging with the material. So I've been thinking about doing that, or maybe doing specific Zoom chat questions to kind of probe them along, just so that they can think about it, kind of like how I have my in-person students doing. But I haven't had my in-person students write their thoughts down, and that could be a way to incorporate the Zoom voices so that maybe it forces a pause, so that they're like, oh, those people are turning in their slips. Oh, let me type it in the chat real quick. So I haven't tried that yet.
So one of the other sentiments kind of coming up in the chat is saying, sometimes students are just zooming in to get those participation points, and they're not having any intention to really actively engage in that lecture. One of the points I will say is that it's not just students, right? There are faculty doing that too. They're zooming into meetings and they're not there. They want the credit for having been there. They want to wave at the beginning, they want to wave at the end, in the middle, they're doing all the rest of their stuff. So I think this is a more pervasive phenomenon kind of going on there. One of the things that happened in my class yesterday is we have a CAT community in my Gen Psych. So for those of you who are aware, a CAT community is students who take 3 classes together. So they take general psychology, intro to sociology, and the psychology prejudice CAT community. There appears to be kind of a ringleader who decides if a group of 6 or 7 are going to class that day in person or if they're zooming in. And it's a little bit weird to kind of see this kind of group behavior. One person says, yeah, let's go. And it's, no, it's too rainy. Let's all stay home. And we just have like this pocket of the class that sits up front is either there or not, kind of based on whatever whims are kind of happening there. And one of the things that I'm trying to appreciate is that we're all dealing with stuff. I know that a lot of the decisions I'm making are not optimal. I'm not necessarily doing things as well as I could all of the time. And I'm trying to encourage my students to kind of take advantage of their learning, to come to class, to zoom in real time if they can't come to class in person. But other than encouraging, I can't make their decisions for them. So if I'm not going to have points associated with it, then really it's going to be their decision, and they can choose to learn or choose not to. So I think inspiring the students that are in your class, I think focusing on making sure that what you're doing in class really is valuable is one of the best things that I would recommend. So make the experience worthwhile and try to entice them to come back and to participate rather than try to mandate it. That's some of the thoughts that I would have.
Yeah, and I think sorry, go ahead, Destiny.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, this is something that we've talked about in this group before, and that's just offering opportunities and remembering, like, I always keep, whenever I get frustrated that my students aren't doing something, like, I just bring it back to, like, I'm offering opportunities. It's up to them to decide whether they're going to take them or not. And along with that, then, like, I check in with them really regularly to see how they're doing. If there's things that I'm doing in class that they feel are really supportive and that they would like me to keep doing, if there are things that I'm not doing that they would like me to start doing. And so if you check in with your Zoom students just to say, like, what's working well, like, do you want to be participating more? Do you want to have more passive ways of participation, like polls? Do you want me to call on you? Getting their feedback as to, like, how they want to engage with the course can be really helpful and liberating for you to be like, oh, they don't want to have to use their voice because, a lot of them are in situations where, like, it's awkward to be talking, or, they have roommates or whatever. So, like, getting their feedback as to the ways that they want to engage with the course can be really helpful. And then you don't have to feel like, oh, I should be calling on them. If the students in person want to use their voices and the students on Zoom want to participate in more passive ways, then that's fine, at least for me.
I'm going to add to what Andy is saying. I was teaching a class online exclusively last spring, And I found that the students who really want to learn will come back if you offer an evening session. And there are some who are really shy and don't want to speak up in class. But when they know you're back there at 7 o'clock in the evening and they're the only ones on there with you, they'll talk a lot more and they'll share a lot more. And therefore, they're benefiting from that one-on-one time that they may get with the faculty member. And those students were the students that I found were more successful as well in the class because they were motivated to come and share or to talk. And the ones that didn't may have been in class during the day, but really weren't engaged, and therefore did not get the benefit of that more intimate time with me one-on-one. And sometime it would be pretty late. I mean, it would be 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, and I'm still seeing students, but they were motivated to come and show up. And they would do that day in, day out. Whenever I would offer it, they'd show up. And I think those are the students that you spend time with who really want to learn.
The one thing that I'll say is, speaking for myself, is that I try to be very careful with what I can sustainably offer. So I'm not going to offer a second section later in the day. If you missed the first one, didn't do it then, 7 o'clock, that's family time for me. So I'm not going to be doing that. So do what you can do what you want to do, those kind of things, but don't feel compelled to go really above and beyond the call of duty if you're doing your job in the course. So I'm not saying that what you're doing isn't amazing, LB, but that wouldn't work for me. I just don't have the bandwidth to kind of handle those extra responsibilities. One of the things that Melissa raised, and I think this is something that has been really kind of emotionally hard for me, is that especially during the pandemic, I've really tried to be as empathetic as I can. When students ask for an extension, when they ask for an adjustment, the answer is almost always yes. And I'm reaching out, I'm trying to, but at the end of the day, the students have to do the work. So even with all of the empathy and all of the adjustments and all of reaching out and all of listening and all that, at the end of the day, there are still students who don't do that work. And I feel bad about it, and it kind of eats me up because I'm saying, what did I not do to inspire them to do it? And I think sometimes we just have to remind ourselves that the students really are empowered to make those choices, to take those opportunities, as Andy had mentioned just a little bit ago. And if you can say, I did my best to provide the positive learning experience, I did my best to be empathetic to my students, I did my best to teach them well, and they didn't succeed, then it's not on you. And
I think that with that, there's an important, I view it as like a teaching opportunity in there, that there are some students that they're like, I have 2 jobs and I'm taking 5 classes. And I say, it sounds like you really have too much on your plate. You cannot do all that. And so you have to make choices. You have to think about your priorities. And it's okay if your priority is not my class. I am not offended by that on a personal level in any way, shape, or form. I understand that you may say, look, these are the things that I need to prioritize, and that's not this class. And so then opening up a discussion about so given that my class might not be your priority, what is the correct course of action? What's the course of action that seems most appropriate? Should you drop my class? Do you think you can get a C in the class, and is that okay with you? But just making sure that the student is being intentional with their decisions, that it's fine if you're I'm going for a C in the class, that is the absolute maximum that I'm going to be able to pull off. Great. Then let's make that plan and let's work for it. But having that open communication to say, I'm going to offer you opportunities, and if you don't take them for whatever reason, sometimes for very legitimate reasons, that's fine. But you have to be okay with what the consequences are.
I think also, Andy, that we see students who will repeatedly give you an excuse, and being able to sort through the legitimacy of why one is not there, and yet understand that those students, as you said, have a choice. And if they choose to give you an excuse over and over and over again, they suffer the consequences of that. And being empathetic is not going to solve that problem, because they learn to be that way through subsequent classes. And that's not a behavior that we promote. So there's also the intuitiveness of the faculty member to sort of figure out how many excuses is too many. How many times do they ask for that concession and it's just a habit?
And I've had that tough discussion with students where I say, like, look, all of these excuses that you're giving me may be fully true and legitimate. And like, that's like, I'm not going to judge one way or the other what your excuses are, but be aware that when you are constantly giving excuses, that people are going to start to doubt the legitimacy of these excuses. And so like, you know, again, using it as a teaching opportunity and having them be aware that's like, look, all of this stuff may be happening to you. You know, you may be dealing with a tough time, but when you're constantly giving excuses and not showing any kind of good faith effort to, you know, improve or to get your work done, it's hard on the receiving end of that to really say like, okay, like, I'm not going to want to keep giving you excuses. And I like to bring it back to like, if you have a job, your boss, they may not say anything. They just might pass you up for the next opportunity. You know, you might not get a promotion. You might be the one who gets let go if they have to, you know, do layoffs because they say like, well, this guy's always giving excuses. So just be aware that your actions have consequences.
So in the chat, if you're keeping up, and I'll relay kind of some overview of the idea, is we're kind of talking about general strategies, but what happens when a specific student starts to kind of really put pressure on that I need this grade and all of these horrible things are going to happen to me if I don't get it, and kind of is putting pressure on you to do even more than the empathetic adjustments that you're making. And these happen. So there's a detailed example in the chat. I once had a student tell me if they failed general psychology, they were an international student, that they would have to go into the army in their home country. And if someone told me that failing a class would mean I'd have to go to the army, there's no way I would have ever failed that class. So how do we deal with these very, very personal situations where the student comes and starts to put that pressure and saying, because of your class, because of my performance or my failure to perform in your class, all this bad stuff's going to happen to me? And I'm kind of looking for two things. So how do we deal with the student? But then how do we also deal with the emotion attached to that? Because no matter what we say or do in that situation, it's not going to feel good. So I'm kind of looking for some guidance in both of those.
Well, I will say this, Don. The way that, and I have some students in that situation, I try to talk through in sort of a counseling way to decipher what's really going on there. If they're telling me part of the story, what action have they tried to take themselves? Can I offer some opportunity on campus to get more information? Can I send them to counseling or to our advisors and say, this person I think needs some additional work with the one-on-one with someone on campus and counseling? Or if they say they're visiting with a counselor at this point, then we have a little bit of a conversation about how do they feel like they're doing in those sessions? Are they making progress? Do they feel like they're getting a hold of the situation? So I try to assess a little bit more from them in terms of not only where I think they could get help, but also where to send them to get more help. And so that's how I try to deal with, in fact, I have two students in that situation right now, and they're both in counseling. And the question is, you know, what's happening in your counseling stage? Are you talking about these issues? How are you trying to decipher and move forward with them? And that's been helpful for them to either share that with me or to make sure they're sharing that with their advisor, who can also help them with academic decisions. And that's helped. That's helped. It's not an end-all be-all solution there, but it's a way to get them thinking about those things and trying to direct them in the right place for help.
What do the rest of y'all think?
Well, one of the things I've had some success with is I talked about people and say, or talk about these situations, say, part of your experience at the university are what I call co-curricular activities. Whether you're an NCAA athlete or you want to go see someone who's giving a talk that just happens to coincide with my class time. And then I say, you're the best judge of how to sort of get this education. And if sometimes that means you can't be in class with Billy, I get it. But I trust you are making that decision. And I assume that you're doing it strategically. So if you miss a small assignment, I assume you've balanced the loss of the points or the effect on the grade with your time at that moment. And a lot of people respond to that. Oh, wow, you trust me? Absolutely. That's also what you're trying to learn here is that. And so if you have a problem, and that's the other thing I say, come talk to me because we can get in front of things very quickly. And if it's after the fact, that's fine. We'll sort it out. Okay. But I trust you. And a lot of folks look at it, it takes the antagonism out or the adversarial nature of the relationship, gets rid of it. And like, oh, wow. So Don, kind of the inverse of what you have, you know, I'm teaching the military history class for ROTC cadets. So this is the class they need to get into the Army, right? So if they fail my class, they can't be commissioned officers, right? And so the exact opposite of what you had to experience, but it's the same kind of problem because, you know, there's some pressure like, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm an architect, I don't really do history. What do I need to do? Pay attention, let's work through this, we got it. I trust that you're making smart decisions. Oh, I got this project that's due, no problem. I'll record the lecture, you just watch it later, ask me questions directly. And then I found that when I set that trust and establish that's the relationship from the start, and then I assume you're making good strategic decisions. If you need help, I'm available. It's turned everything on its ear. People are like, hey, I couldn't make it. I felt terrible. That's okay. It's one class. We'll get through it. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's not going to stop. But that's one of the things that I did. And I saw a massive improvement in the way attendance was handled and the way people felt they could approach me.
Really, I really like your idea because I think when students realize it is their responsibility and they know how best they learn, you hope that they will make good practical decisions. And part of it is helping them see when they didn't and help them realize how they can in the future. And I really like that strategy. I've used that with smaller things of that nature. But for them to understand what the consequences are as well, but let them make the decision and then it's their choice. And because we're going to be there no matter what, we're going to be teaching the rest of the class no matter what. So, and I try to give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit. Freshmen, it's a discipline. I think Leslie would say that as well. We're trying to get our freshmen first year to recognize the sort of the mode of teaching and the responsibility of students as you move up the degree, that this is a professional school and there are certain things that you need to learn to do. Maybe you didn't learn them in high school, but they're important in terms of your own taking responsibility for learning. But I think when you get to upper level students who've had those experiences before, they sort of get it. They get it and they do make the right choices for themselves because ultimately when they move out in the world, they have to make those choices for themselves too. So, yeah.
So the conversation in the chat has gone a little bit further in that Melissa's kind of wondering, the student's saying that they're doing all the right things. And she's kind of wondering either they're lying or what they're doing isn't actually the right thing. So one of the really cool recommendations that Tiffany made was that maybe when they're saying, you know, they're studying correctly, show evidence of having studied correctly. Show that you've highlighted and annotated your notes in a way that would support your success on those quizzes or those exams. And maybe do that with a tutor, not necessarily with you, because as Melissa noted, we can't be their instructors and their tutors at the same time. One of the things that I try to do in these conversations, and I frame my classes in terms of recommendations and opportunities, kind of like Annie was talking about before. I don't have requirements in my class. I'm offering an exam, I'm offering you an opportunity to do a paper and those kind of things. So you make choices after that fact. And I'll make a lot of recommendations of how to succeed. So this is what I would recommend you do, this is what I recommend you not do, those kind of things. So anytime a student asks me, you know, I didn't do that well, I was like, did you follow the recommendations? And a lot of times like, I didn't watch that video or I didn't listen when you said that. It's like, well, my first recommendation would be to be aware of the recommendations and then to follow them for next time. When I have the conversations also with my students, I let them know unless I made a mistake, which is possible, but not likely when I've released the grades, right? Unless I've made a mistake, all of your past grades are done. We can talk about the future. We can talk about the things coming up, but everything that's already done is not negotiable. And those are the kind of things that I'll use your past behavior to kind of predict your future behavior, maybe give some personalized recommendations in student hours. But I'm not negotiating the stuff that already happened. So if you've already failed that exam, you failed that exam. That's in the past. We can't do anything about that. I like Tiffany's idea of saying, you kind of failed yourself. I myself don't say it that clearly to my students. I don't think that's necessarily going to fit my teaching persona. Come in, like, if you failed yourself. That's probably not who I am as a teacher right this second. Maybe a couple years ago I say that, but right now I probably don't say that. But I think it's kind of letting students know they do have that power. They have the power to succeed. They have the power to learn. The opportunity to provide feedback is best before they've performed. So if you're having trouble figuring out the assignment, if you have trouble understanding the content, talking to me before the paper, before the exam is one of those recommendations I'll make for success. And I think as Destiny was talking about before, there might be opportunities in those classes to kind of say, okay, now, what conversations do we need to have to help you succeed on this upcoming assignment? We just talked about a difficult concept. What conversations do we need to have to make that crystal clear for when you're applying this on the exam next week? So creating those opportunities are also good things we can point back at and say, I did that for you. Did you take advantage of that?
And including as part of that, like if you can, with some of your assignments, having multiple iterations of them so that students can turn in a first version, you can give them that feedback and then they can take that, or have them do peer feedback in class. Or I've also done that with exams, even where I've had students, they take an exam and then as part of the exam, whatever points they've lost, they can gain half of them back by going back through. They work in groups to talk out their answers, what they did well, what they can improve on, and write out, okay, like this is what I didn't understand about this question, or this is what I missed. And sometimes it's just, I was being careless and I misread the question. Sometimes it's, ooh, I didn't realize that, like, I didn't understand this concept. But if they write out, this is where I went wrong and this is what I would do, how I would do it right, that I give them half the points back that they lost, because I see that as the learning opportunity. I don't see the exam as the final assessment, but like this is an assessment and you have an opportunity to learn from this assessment. So if you can give them opportunities to check in with that feedback and then improve, if you can build that into your course, that helps students a lot.
And if you have the time to do that, that's awesome. If you don't have the time to do that, just be aware everything we assign comes back. Leslie had an interesting suggestion for how to deal with the case where you think the student is potentially being untruthful. And that's saying, you're saying XYZ, but I'm seeing ABC. I'm kind of wondering why these don't line up. Get that conversation going. Also having them demonstrate how they do XYZ, as Tiffany was kind of talking about, is a good way to go in there too. I will say that again, these are hard conversations to have. Even something less accusatory might be something some of us are not comfortable with. If I have these conversations with my students, I typically try to have my teaching assistant there with me. So there are two people kind of hearing the conversation along with the student. If you need a senior colleague or a colleague or a peer or something like that to help you out there too, that's something that you could potentially do if you knew the conversation was coming. If the student surprises you at the beginning or end of class, that's something different. By the way, I would not have these conversations before class ever. That can potentially throw off the emotion that I'm going to have when I need to teach. So say, hey, let's talk after, or even better yet, let's set up a time to talk later. And Destiny said, in terms of handling that emotional part, so the fact that, while I'm saying the things that I believe, it doesn't make me feel good. Destiny's saying that maybe framing it as opportunities rather than requirements helps us understand a bit more emotionally that the ball is in the student's court, not our own, right? It's our job to facilitate student learning and success, but we don't actually do it. And I think opportunities is a good way to remind ourselves of that. All right, so who's feeling better about this? I'm feeling mildly better. We get a couple of thumbs up. So Destiny, I don't know if we specifically answered your questions about how to get them to participate over Zoom, but we had an amazing 35-minute discussion over a whole bunch of stuff.
I think it all really. So.
All right, so what else would we like to talk about today? I love the chats. The chats are awesome.
I'm glad empathy is coming up in this talk over and over. I was struggling with kind of a teaching tip of the week, and my teaching tip was referring back to your empathy series on your website. So that'll come out tomorrow. But I think it's a good time in the semester for that reminder.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. And we're having to remind ourselves now too. I'll be completely honest, late October, early November, it's time to explicitly remind ourselves of empathy, because I don't know about y'all, I'm getting tired. It's a hard time of the semester. And it's funny because I'll have people say, like my students, like, we didn't know instructors and teachers got tired. We just thought y'all said, of course we do. We are completely human. And it is a good reminder to all of us. And I think being kind to yourself, is kind of part of that too. So a lot of the suggestions that I sometimes hear people make, we've heard a couple today, put more work on me. I try not to do that thing. I try not to take on more work for myself than what I've already kind of allocated to the class, because like all of you, I wear a lot of hats, and only one of my hat is the instructor of that particular course. I have a lot of other things that I need to do. So I also have the benefit of working with excellent teaching assistants, which I know I'm very, very lucky to have. So people like Noah Rankin and Ashley Schiffer help me through a lot of these kind of things. But I think being fair to us is also important on our decision making. One of the things when students ask me for, special accommodations, if it's going to be something like Andy said, kind of redoing an iterative assignment, then we've got to do that for everybody. It's not just, okay, well, Slava, you can do that assignment and get extra points. It's no, now that's an opportunity for everybody. So I tend to be very, very careful about the decisions I make in terms of what the blowback is going to be on us. So given that we are all tired, and we do this in all my lab meetings, I want to hear some wins. I want to hear some things that have gone really well this semester, because one of the things I like about the chats is I like to feel good connecting with all of you who are excellent teachers. So what are some things we're proud of? What are some things that have really gone well in the classroom this semester?
I had an amazing moment a couple weeks ago where I was getting ready I had my students do presentations, video presentations that they submitted in the discussion board in Canvas. And I had them with online classes before do like peer review asynchronously with those type of assignments. I'd had them do peer review with written work in class, but I was having them do peer review with these presentations. So I told them to bring headphones so that they could do it in class, listen to their peers' presentations, and then have discussions. And before class, I was like, wow, I am really nervous about this. I just don't know how this is going to go. I don't know how time is going to work for me. I was so, and I was pacing around my office, just oh my God, I am so nervous. And then I was like, you know what? I'm leaning in. And I got to class and I was like, hey guys, I got to tell you, I'm really nervous about today's class. And one of my students just goes, you're nervous? And I was like, yeah. And so I told him, I said, I've done peer review in this way and I've done it in that way. I've never done it like this before. So I don't know how it's going to go. So I ask that you have patience with me and that you approach this with an open mind. And then afterwards, tell me how it went, be honest, and we'll decide if this is something worth pursuing in the future, or if this is something that we should never, ever do and never speak of again. And the students were they just jumped all on board. It was a great class. And everybody was just super into it. And so I was just wow. that was great. I was happy that I had that moment. I felt like students since then in class have been just really in my corner. So that's been great.
I think that is fantastic. And I think one of the things that I really love about that is you convey to your students that how they do matters to you, which I think is sometimes surprising to them. I've told students sometimes before, I am more nervous giving exams than taking them. Because when I was taking, I could control the experience, but when I give them, I can't control that experience anymore. So I love that you showed them how much you cared, and then they came through with awesome content. That is amazing. One person said, this might be silly, my win this week is having made my health insurance enrollment choices and submitting those. Yeah, it only took half an hour for me this year, which I think is a record. So that's an awesome one too. Destiny said, implemented a new part to assignments where I asked students to describe connections between topics we go over, e.g. relate a concept from today's lecture to Tuesday's topic. It's been going really well. Students are connecting material beautifully, even without me pointing it out. They're also starting to point out connections in class. So it's nice to know my assignment is helping them in class too. I heard someone once say that critical thinking, kind of simply defined, is just the ability to make connections. And it's one of the hardest things to teach. So Destiny, that is amazing that your students are doing that. Congratulations. What are some other wins?
I would say, Don, because of the community development class I teach, there's certain subjects that I know will bring about an arousal in the class. You know that if they're not talking about political capital very much, if you get to environmental capital, they're like gangbusters. And it almost never fails. It never fails. Yesterday, we could not get through the lecture because we just were chiming in about the politics that's going on with the environment. And I mean, everybody was talking, and including me. I mean, we all were like sharing, and there was discourse, but somebody else in the class would whisper to the other person their point of view, and the person would get on board, and we'd keep going. It was just a rich conversation. Now we have a speaker today who is a Mitch Silver, who was the commissioner for Parks and Recs in New York City for about 7 years. And though he will not be with us, one of our alums will be with us tomorrow. And I've already started thinking about how can I get that rich kind of conversation with him that we were able to discuss. And again, there's a continuation of environmental capital. So I don't think I'll have to do a whole lot to get it. They're already fired up. So I think this week will be a really good week for us.
That is fantastic that your students were that engaged in hopefully civil and respectful discourse over politics, which doesn't always happen. So it's great you were able to model that experience for them. Tiffany said one of her wins is she's had several students ask if they can come to her dissertation defense. That is amazing because students asking to do things like that is not common in my experience. So that is amazing. Melissa has another win, says, had her purse stolen last week. That doesn't sound like the start to a win, so I'll keep reading. A random person ran up and just grabbed it when it was eating outside, and someone found it a few blocks away in Kansas City. Wallet wasn't there, but the keys were, which is not a small thing. Best part, they tried to buy $36 worth of Taco Bell, but already canceled the card, so it was declined. So that is amazing. I'm glad you got your keys back. I hope everything else was okay too. Tiffany said another win is she started to make connections in teaching methods from dance teacher training and teaching in a more traditional classroom, e.g. the tips for handling different types of students. Questions I learned from a dance conference were also helpful here. And Melissa points out that the purse stealing is one of the reasons she's exhausted right now. So that's awesome. One of my wins, and if you haven't seen it, Noah will drop the link in the chat, is that my students had dared me on the first day of class to do a split because Noah told them I could do that. And I said, if they did their first exam well enough, I would. So they remembered this, and I did a split on the table in front of my class without hurting myself. So that was pretty amazing. Noah will drop it in. We have video of it because of course we do. So that's kind of fun. And it was a neat kind of moment to just kind of connect with my students a little bit more, other than that, professor in front and the students in class. It was a much more personal moment. And for those of you worried about the use of class time, I did it right before class, so it wasn't technically on class time. So don't worry, where Board of Regents would have approved. Probably not, but anyway. So other wins y'all may have had.
I want to tell you about one that I had that was not a student in class, but a student I'd had who wanted a letter of recommendation, or at least a recommendation for a job. And this person was an amazing student. Her husband had been a PhD student with us and had been also an amazing student. And I was called by the potential employer. And I sort of covered everything before she started asking questions. And she said, "You've already answered my questions." I said, "Well, is there anything else I can answer?" And at that point, she said, "Well, she actually is our first choice. And you've already covered this. This is the feeling that we thought we were getting from her, but it's nice to hear you say that." And I felt like, hey, I hit it out the park for this potential employee. And so the young lady and I talked about how important it was for the employers to feel comfortable and be able to assess potential employees and how I read them and how she read them. And so it was a meeting of the minds beyond just the recommendation. And it just made me feel good that I knew this student, this former student, that well, and that the relationship that we had really bore itself out in a potential move for her as a professional.
LB, I'm not surprised at all. And I imagine it's a pretty common experience that you do know your students that well and you've had that impact on them. I think it's so amazing that you got to support the student after graduation, right? Some of the things we think, our relationships with those students end once they've, kind of walked at graduation. That's not true. And I love that you're able to maintain that connection and support them. That is awesome. What are some other great moments? Yes,
I'll throw something out. I'm the leader of a committee in our college that is a faculty student combination committee. And lately up until this past last week, we'd been meeting via Zoom, but the students rose up and said, no, can we please meet in person? We like meeting in person. It makes the energy better. And also, can we meet in like some different spaces? And so we had our meeting in person last week in a not typically used space, not for critiques, not for class time. And we had an amazing meeting. And it was eye-opening to me, one, going back to in-person meetings, and that we actually were productive for a full hour, which is insane. Two, realizing just how much of like a wet blanket using the same rooms over and over can do. Like you just kind of build up this palimpsest of drudgery. And then just, being in a position where like, in name, I'm the leader of this committee, but in turning over some of these decisions or listening to the students and what they're wanting, just some wonderful things are happening. And it's just nice. It's so great.
I love that you were flexible enough to do the things that your students on that committee wanted to do. I know some people that would probably say, no, we have this room scheduled and we're going to do it at this time and we have it over Zoom. And some people, like we talked about at the beginning, use it over Zoom so they can do other things other than the meeting. And your students actually said, no, we want to do the work in the way that we think is going to be best. That is awesome that you're able to do that for and with them.
Just throw in there, one instructor had the same room, like they were in the same room every time, but they always did something different with the room. So if you have a room that, allows you to move the tables, then you just kind of break it up different, and it just kind of gets things going a little bit different as you enter the classroom, because it's kind of like, well, where am I going to sit today? It's not kind of that same. Well, this is, how you could just kind of have this seating chart that just happens on the first day and continues for no reason whatsoever. You can probably explain that, Dawn, since you know psychology, but I don't know why that happens.
I love telling my students to move their environment based on what we're doing. So like I'll put them in groups, and a lot of times they tend to sit, like I have them sit always in a circle to start the class. And a lot of times, then I'll put them in groups and they'll kind of try to like work in a line. And I'm like, is that the best way to work together, do you think? And it only takes a few times before they start going like, oh, we should move our environment. And then I praise them. Yes, good job. Find the best thing that's going to work for you.
I just did that this week with my class. I told them beginning of the semester that they set up their pods. I call them pods. So there's 3 pods in the room. And they work together in those pods, but then they can work across the room in teams. And so I said to them Monday, I said, we're at a break. We're getting ready to start a new project. We're more than halfway through the semester. So it's time for us to switcheroo. And instead of moving, you move the desk. So that way your stuff in your desk comes with you. And I assigned about 5 students that were my excelling students. And I said, I don't want you all in the same pod. You've got to divide yourselves and help the weaker ones in those sections. So I said, you figure it out. And by Wednesday morning, they told the students, we're going to meet on Tuesday evening and rearrange the room. And they did that by Wednesday morning. They were all in different places. And I admitted, thanks, Andy, I had to admit to them, you know, I've learned who you are by where you sat. Now, if I mispronounce who you are, I forget your name, please, I apologize, because I've got to figure out the new seating arrangement. So we had, and then I had some place to be this morning, but they worked in teams. So it was a good experience because they get to know other people in the room. For one, they're sitting with people that perhaps they never thought about their work and how they could help each other and communicate to be a good example. So I use that to teach as well. So we just did that rearrangement yesterday.
That is awesome. I love that. And I love that you kind of get your students to create new networks to help them share their learning and help each other to succeed. That's awesome.
I also think it's great that you invite the students to do that. It's really funny because I thought in one class I would do that, like try to sit next to a new person each day. And it's odd going against those kind of social norms because the person that you sat by might feel like, well, why did you, was there a bad experience by me? It's really awkward for the students unless they're invited to do that.
Well, I think the reason why I wait a while is because you'll have students who are very vocal and be disruptive to the person sitting next to them in the studio because that person wants to home in and be very focused. And so the 5 or 6 students that I asked to help me organize the room, we talked about, well, let's not put this person next to that person because they're going to be a person who'll distract that person, but let's put this person next to that one because they're strong enough to keep that person. So we talked about the dynamics of the class in making decisions. And I was on the way out of the door today and I stopped one of my students. She says, I love where I'm sitting now. So I'm already getting feedback from them about where they're located. And they together made that group decision. So it was a positive experience.
That is awesome, LB. I love that you're doing that. So we've got not that much longer in the semester. Anyone got any fun goals in the last couple of weeks that we have?
Hey, Don, I had a kind of question, but is that okay if I ask?
I think we'll allow that, Slav. It's okay.
Thank you. I was just wondering, what people's this is just a small thing, but I was thinking like in terms of T-vals and like, I was thinking of like giving it a little bit, maybe a week before Thanksgiving break, because they would have had me for 2 months at this point and they know it versus like giving it the last, and it's pretty flexible when I do it. So it's really up to me. So versus the last with the extra stress and all that stuff. And I don't know whether that positively or negatively would impact me, but just wondering people's perceptions, opinions. I know a lot of people do it at the end, and I don't know if that's just because they've always done it that way, or if there's or ultimately is there anything wrong or weird about doing it, right before Thanksgiving.
So there are arguments for and against this. What do the rest of y'all think?
I'm planning to open my T-vals the week before Thanksgiving to give students so that they can, there are some students that they know the end of the semester is really busy. And so they kind of like, they feel like they already have a good handle on what the class is like and that they're happy to evaluate it, early. And so for those students who just kind of want to like get things off their plate, I open them early and then leave them open until like midway through finals.
Okay.
I will say, I think it's really important for the students to absolutely know when you get the T-vals. I've had that question so many times, and even though it's there, students still are very concerned that you get the T-vals before their grades come out.
To that, Trina, I have a method of, I do exit interviews with my students. So we schedule those during finals week. And I usually do the T-val after they've presented and they've gotten some of that behind them. There's no other responsibility in the class. And at that point, I'm giving them positive things to work on, things that I could say, you're really good at this. when you go to your next class as the faculty member of observation, here's something that you're weaker at that I think you could work on with the next teacher that you're going to have, or you're really good at that, you know, and so you can help other students understand that. So I give them both the positive and the negative, and also start to get them thinking about which discipline they will apply for in the next month that they're back at the beginning of the new semester. And so we kind of, I really call it an exit interview, but it's a way for me to get a feel for where they're at, whether they agree that those are their strengths and weaknesses. I give them a little piece of candy, a kissy or something to send them on their way, you know, or something for Christmas, a little, you know, Christmas something to send them on their way. And by that time they've had that, they've gotten past maybe the final presentation that they didn't feel really good about, but they've had a really positive final, you know, conversation with me. And hopefully that, you know, is something that may also if reflect in their response of how the class went. So I have a method of sort of leading them along, but also giving them some very valuable information. And I do that in the spring as well. And I tell people what they could work on over the summer if they're so inclined. So it's a way for them to think forward as well as backwards.
So Noah's going to drop a couple links in the chat too about evaluations. And one of those videos is a video we show our students when they do evaluations to kind of let them know the importance, because not only, and I agree with Trina, we got to let them know when they're up, but also let them know what the purpose is, you know, that they are important. When you give them, and this is back to Slava's original question, for me, depends on what kind of information you want from them. I highly recommend having personalized questions at the end of the TVAL. And what I do is I ask them about specific components of my class. Many of those components I couldn't ask them about if I gave it before Thanksgiving, for instance. So given the information that I want, I can't do them early because I want to get information about stuff that happens toward the end of the class specifically. If you don't need to do that, or if you're going to get that information in another way, I don't see a real issue with giving the TVALs earlier. I do think giving them a window to complete it is a great idea. I think making sure they know, you know, it's not going to impact the grading at all is really important thing for them to do. And I try to let my students know I want your honest feedback. Don't just tell me something is good or bad. Tell me why it was good, why it was bad, and if it was bad, how you would change it. Because I really do use these as a formative assessment, not a summative assessment. I want to use it to make my classes better moving forward. I just don't want you to tell me nice things. I want you to tell me, what did you like if you liked something? And if these videos that Noah's dropping in are going to work for your students, feel free to share it with them. Just kind of provide some context. And one of those is more about, you know, potentially letting your students know what the importance is. Another is more kind of for us to think about what TVALs potentially mean, or, you know, student perception data, which is really what they're. It's not a teaching evaluation, it's student perception data, which is something different.
You know, Don, this is something I heard from your former director a long time ago. When I was struggling a little bit with the negativism that might show up in the TVALs. And Jan actually suggested that during the semester, I'd sort of take a pulse of the class along the way for each project or assignment that I do. And it's anonymous. I just give them a piece of paper and say, tell me some things you learned, tell me some things you wish you had learned, and tell me some things that I could have done better. And I get those back, sift through them. So I have a bit of the pulse of the class by the time I get to my TVALs. And it also gives me a chance to switcheroo a little bit, to improve and respond to them. And I usually give them a kind of a synopsis of what the class said and how I'm going to work at improving that, so that they know I heard them and I'm working at making their experience better. So
yeah, one of the we do this, and Noah's going to drop things to do at mid-semester in there as well. I recommend that we do this. And even if you're not going to make the change, it gives you that opportunity to remind them why you're having to do the thing in the first place. Because I've sometimes had people say, you know, I gave mid-semester evaluations. All of my class, my entire class said they don't want exams anymore. Does that mean I can't give them exams? Like, well, no, it's not a democracy. It's not like they get to vote you off the island. But maybe it's time to kind of talk about, you know, what is the reservation with exams? This is why I'm doing it. What's the issue that you're having? What are you not understanding? How can I help you? So you can have those conversations, even if you're not going to implement the change they suggest. And as Andy mentioned, tends to result in higher T-Val scores too, because you're demonstrating that you care about their learning and their experience. And one of the things I don't think we do enough as teachers is tell them that. You know, Trina mentioned the empathy series. One of the recommendations we have throughout there is let your students know you care. Let your students know to reach out to you. Let your students know you want them to learn and have positive experiences. And when you say those things, mean them. It is now 1 o'clock. I don't know where the time has gone, but I want to thank you all for engaging in our chat again today. I look forward to the teaching chats. Next week, we have Andy Faber coming. Andy's always here, but next week, Andy is going to be in the spotlight as Andy talks about pulling back the curtain, illuminating the how and why of learning in our classes. We are really excited about that. Andy is one of our Teaching and Learning Center fellows. We are very excited to celebrate her in that situation, and next week will be hers. As always, I have a great deal of fun, and I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday at noon. So I hope you have a great rest of your semester.